Hey there, are you wondering whether you need this brush? You've been looking at them and thinking, what is this used for and do I need it? Well, you've come to the right place. I'm going to talk about fan brushes today. I'm going to show you some techniques as well, so you can decide whether you need this brush or not. So stay tuned to the end to make sure you get all the info you need to make sure you're making the right purchase. All right, let's get started. First of all, we have two different types of fan brushes that you can get. There's a soft brush that's like, ooh, brush therapy, I love this. And then there's the coarse brush that's like scratchy. And you're like, do I want this scratchy brush? I want a soft brush. Well, you're gonna find out which brush you need in this video, so stick around. Take a look, first of all, at the soft versus coarse. Now, when you turn the fan brush one way, it's really thin. And then when you turn it the other way, it's the shape of a fan. So that's how you know it's a fan brush. Okay, and it actually says it on the handle as well. It says fan. So do all of them say fanny? This one says fanny brush. And this one doesn't say, but you can tell when you just look at it that it's a fan brush, okay? So let's get started on some techniques. All right, so what you're gonna need is something to paint on. You're gonna need one or two brushes if you want to try the coarse one versus the soft one. I'll do both so that you can see the difference at least. I have a third one, just a different size. Some water. So I always like when I'm painting to have two water dishes, and one is going to be kind of my dirty water that I'm going to put my brush in first to clean, and then I go into the other one. This is when I'm changing colors or waking up my brush. So put those there. And I'm just gonna put the paint right onto this, otherwise you can use a paint palette. You could have a little cloth to wipe something, wipe your brush off, dab it off, and so we can get started. And you're gonna need some paint too, so you can totally decide what colors you wanna do. I'm just gonna grab some light green, some bold, let's do some bold green, why not? This is just a Liquitex Basics acrylic, so it's not a super thin or thick, it's kind of in between. All right, so we're just gonna put a little bit of paint on here. Like I said, you can put it on a palette or just put it directly on your sketchbook, totally up to you. So before I wet this, I'm gonna start with the coarse brush and show you a couple things you can do. So whenever I pick up paint, I don't scoop it and I don't, go right into the middle. I like to take off the side, okay? So what I want you to pay attention to is how I hold my brush. So if you're holding on this way versus this way, like perpendicular, that's gonna be a totally different look, right? So if I just touch, all I'm doing is like stamping it with my brush held almost flat towards the table. Or if I hold it straight up and just stamp it like that, you can see the difference. Now, see how the marks there, it's almost like a stamp. Almost if you took a stamp and you're going, all of these look quite similar. You're creating a very predictable look that kind of shows us, like could be like used as a pattern or that kind of thing. But you want to be careful if you're painting something that's not, you don't want to have a pattern that looks too contrived, right? So with this brush like this, you can do some dry brush strokes, so which is going to show more texture, and depending on what you're painting on, this has a bit of a texture to it. If it's completely smooth, that'll be a bit different, and then if it's on canvas, that'll be even more textured than this paper. So you can do various things like strokes, give it a try, dabbing, and then the direction you're dabbing. If I dab this way versus this way, right? When you change the direction of the way you're holding your brush, that's going to give you a different look, and that might help you out when you're, painting a specific type of tree or plant or an animal of something. I find these can be very helpful in landscapes. Okay, so this is while it's dry. So this is dry brushing. So look at what happens after I've stamped for a little bit. You can kind of create a lighter look, etc. Let's try it with the wet. So I'm just going to wet my brush, wipe it off so that it's not dripping wet. get some paint, and try these techniques again. So let's go with some stippling on the side. So stippling is kind of like stamping. So see how it looks a bit different, the difference between those? If we do that, it depends on the pressure you're placing on it. So how much paint is on your brush, how much pressure, that's gonna make a difference. Okay, so you could see how that would be maybe good for like a waterfall, or you can do something interesting in the sky. And if I just start dabbing, so when it's wet, you don't see the texture the same way. This almost has this like watercolor-esque, but it has quite still a very nice, like you could see this as being grasses or just trees in the distance, that kind of thing. So even though this is a stiff brush, you can get still a lot of smooth looks to it. Well, let's see how it differs when we grab a soft brush. All right, so let's just wash this right off. So I don't like brushes sitting in water, so I like to wash it right off, wipe, and dab it off on my cloth. Okay, so that doesn't, now I might not be doing a deep clean of it, but I'm getting most of the paint off. Now, while I'm working in my session, I might decide to come back to this brush, and that's why I'm not doing a super deep clean of it at this moment. The end of my paint session, whether that be a couple hours, that kind of thing, a few hours, then I go and I wash my brushes and do a deeper clean. Those are just some extra tidbits there. So this one, I'm not gonna use dry, but you know what? Actually, just for the sake of showing you, let's just show you dry brushing versus wet brushing with this guy. All right, so first let's just do this stamping. So this is the dry brush. So you can see how it makes quite a bit of difference in terms of the look of the texture, that stroke there. Now let's try stippling from above. Very different. So I never use this brush for stippling like that. You can kind of see why. It doesn't really do much. So that's not my go-to for this, but this is just showing you what it can do, right? So it does quite well at picking up the texture of the paper, so I like that. Let's just try tapping. So there you have it. You can tap this way, see what it does. Okay, now let's wet the brush. I'm gonna wash off the paint a little bit because it's drying up. Acrylic paints dry quickly if you're not familiar with that. So let's get it wet, load it up. Let's try it wet. Okay, and that's, I mean, I could press down more, right? I'm just tapping it lightly, up and down. So I wouldn't use this to create a straight line, but like when I'm tapping like that, stippling, but I'll show you something in a second after I do this. Okay, so it's not still like needs to be a bit more wet. Okay, so you can kind of see the differences that happen when you wet your brush versus not, and how that might help you in your painting, depending on what you're painting. Okay, let's wash the brush and do some side loading. So side loading just means you're loading the brush at a different part. You're not loading the whole brush with paint. And kind of, you can see on this particular brush how it has like dark at the tip and goes lighter. You don't load your brush past this point. I mean, you don't have to be so precise, but if you look at it this way, it's just you're loading the brush right along this dark edge of the brush bristles. So bonus tip. All right, let's get into this little edge loading. So see how I've only loaded it on this side, edge. And then you can do techniques with the brush. And when you make a mark, it's going to be maybe less evident that it's a fan brush. So I do love that. You can wet it and try it wet. You can make all kinds of different marks. See how that's really a different mark right there. So you can use it on its edge like this to make a different kind of mark. The other thing I like to use it for, I'm gonna wet the brush and I'm gonna load it. Maybe not fully loaded, but almost. What I like to use it for is sometimes creating wispy lines. So I don't know if you can see that very well. I might need to go to a new page. Let's go over here. So when I'm creating these wispy lines, that's sometimes how I use it for. They can be great for like palm trees because you can kind of create line in various trees, not just palm trees, lots of different trees. You can create pine trees, things. But when people do pine trees with just this brush, to me, it's way too obvious that it's a fan brush, and I don't particularly like that. But as a beginner, it's a great place to start. But if you're trying to up your game, I would definitely not just use this brush. But look how you can kind of create these longer grasses, maybe reeds, you know, and then maybe you adding some different, just holding the brush slightly differently, or the amount of pressure you're placing, or the amount of paint you're putting on, all those factors kind of come into play, right? So you can kind of create this soft edge or more harsh edge, depending on what you're looking for. All right, so that's how you can use a fan brush, a few different techniques between the coarse and the soft. So we're gonna wash this brush. Make sure you do a thorough washing. What do you think? What would work best for you? Well, I think it's obvious that I think it's worth at least having them in the studio, though it's not my go-to brush. So definitely combining this into your workflow might help you create your pieces more quickly, which I'm all for that, but I want to keep that uniqueness. So you don't want that overly predictive brush stroke. You want to kind of combine that with some of your own individual brush strokes to make it look more unique, make it look more natural and real. So that's my take on it. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below and give me a thumbs up if you thought you got some value from this or learned something new. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.